Welcome everyone to our latest I4CP Next Practices weekly call. We have these calls every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 8 a.m. Pacific Time. Great to see so many returning participants and attendees on the call. Start off by opening up the chat. Please introduce yourself there in the chat. That'll be your way to interact with us today. Let us know where you're joining from, what organization you're with, whatever you'd like to share over there. We'll be monitoring the chat for questions that come through. If you're new to this call series, welcome. We are the Institute for Corporate Productivity, I4CP. We discover the people practices that drive high performance. We do this through our research efforts, where we look at what high-performance organizations are doing differently in HR from their low-performing counterparts. We look at revenue growth, market share, profitability, and customer satisfaction to really determine that top quartile of organizations and how they're different from the lower quartile in our quantitative studies. We also conduct a lot of qualitative interviews and other work with our boards, our exchange groups, and our enterprise membership. I'd like to extend a special welcome to the call today to anyone who's with one of our I4CP member organizations. Here you see just a small sample of those organizations. You see they range a lot in terms of industry vertical, from high tech to healthcare, financial, manufacturing. We've also got organizations of all different sizes, from the really big ones like Amazon, Ford, Microsoft, Accenture, and others, to ones that are a bit smaller, maybe some that aren't household names. So again, special welcome to anyone on the call from one of our member organizations. If you are not with a member and would like to learn more, might want to join I4CP membership, just reach out to anyone at I4CP or go to our website and fill out the contact form. A couple of other quick announcements I'd like to share. We recently unveiled our latest major study and major report, the Productivity Predicament. The full report is available for members only, but there is a brief available at go.i4cp.com/productivity. My colleague Kiara has just put the link to that in the chat. So that brief has some of the key findings from this new study, where we were really looking at the sort of balance that organizations are needing to strike between productivity and accountability. And of course, what we've been focusing on so much over the last few years, things like flexibility and empathy for our employees. We had a couple of sessions recently where we walked through some of the key findings. And if you missed those, like all of the calls here at Next Practices Weekly, they're available in the recorded archive. Another item that I wanted to share with you is our how HR is using generative AI. This is a new toolkit that we've provided to members. Again, there's a sort of excerpt from that toolkit that's publicly available, so you can go to the link that's over in the chat or use the QR code here on the screen to access that. We've been focusing a lot on generative AI in particular. We've got a study that we just closed the survey for, and we'll be sharing results to that on a future session. My name's Tom Stone. I'm a senior research analyst here at I4CP, and for today's Next Practices Weekly call, I'm joined by my co-host, Lori Likens. Good morning, Lori.
Hi, Tom. Great to be here with you today.
Good to have you. You're going to be leading the conversation with our special guest, who we'll introduce here in just a moment. But I did want to note some upcoming sessions. We've got this call series every Thursday. So the next one will be coming up next week on the 10th, where my colleague Judy Elbers will be joining me. We'll go a little bit deeper into that AI toolkit that I mentioned, talk through everything and anything generative AI related, a topic that we've covered a few times here on this series over the past year. Then on the 16th, we've got a special one that will be at a different date and time. That'll be on the 16th, geared towards our colleagues over in the APAC region, so Asia Pacific Coast region, Australia, New Zealand, and the Asian countries. We'll be looking at that productivity predicament study and some of the key findings from that. Kevin Martin and Molly Lombardi from I4CP will be presenting that. And then, of course, on the Thursday of that week, we've got another special guest, Debbie Shotwell from Stack Overflow, Chief People and Culture Officer, will be joining us. So those are some of the upcoming sessions. But for today, we're delighted to have a special guest with us, and I'm going to turn things over to you, Lori, to introduce her and to lead us through the conversation.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Good morning, everyone. So glad you could join us today. One of the reasons why Tom invited me to participate in the call today is that I work very closely with members of I4CP's Talent Acquisition Board. So we have 6 boards. They're the senior most, in most cases, C-level executives in their respective functional areas. So the Talent Acquisition Board is made up of the senior most TA executives in their organizations. And so every time we have a conversation with those board members, there's a lot of discussion about overall TA strategy. There's a lot of sharing about what their structures look like and models and all the things. So I'm really thrilled that Joanna has volunteered her time and expertise to join us today and talk about overall TA strategy at Wells Fargo. So Joanna, I know you've been with Wells Fargo for about a dozen years, and before that you were with AT&T. Please share with us a little bit about your career trajectory, the high points, and your whole journey in TA across these last 2 firms.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lori and Tom, for the invite. Really happy to see some of these friendly faces out here. I see some names that I've seen throughout my career so it's really great to see even some of my India colleagues I see on here. So super excited to be here today. So a little bit about myself. I have been with Wells Fargo, as Lori said, a dozen years, which seems amazing at this point that it's been that long. And I've had a really good opportunity to try a lot of different things. I think the best part about what I feel like I've been able to do in my career is work in a lot of growth and transformational spaces over the years. And so I started my career as a recruiter, just like many of us on the call here today. And that was with the then Pacific Bell. And that became part of the AT&T family of companies, where I spent several years in different parts of talent acquisition, from high volume to low volume. And then my last role there was standing up a centralized university relations organization. I decided to switch gears and move into the financial industry, and joined Wells Fargo at a pretty unique space and time. I worked in their community bank area for several years, managing teams all over the U.S. And then my last role prior to the one I'm in today was managing our international space. And so I spent 4 years working with all of the hiring that happens outside of the United States for Wells Fargo. Really enjoyed that opportunity, made a lot of great international friends, but more than anything, really looked at the way talent is looked at in different areas across the world, learned so much. And I think that that's probably the best part about my careers. I feel like I've been able to try and learn new things every time I take a new role. So in my current role, I have responsibility for the talent acquisition strategy and transformation at Wells Fargo. And I get to work with my really talented colleagues as we are on a journey around transformation. And so working on our overall long-term strategy to transform the function. We'll talk more about that as we go. And then the other thing that I just like to talk about, because I think it's so critical, is I'm also a very proud board member of the San Diego LGBT Center. It is something that I've spent the last 8 years on that board. And I think that for most of us, we spend so much time in the office working on the work that we do that, you know, being able to give back is something that I really value, that Wells Fargo values. And so I always like to talk about that.
That's great to hear, Joanna. Thanks for sharing that. I was thinking back as you were talking about the last time you did one of these calls with us, and I believe it was in 2021, and you joined your CHRO. And a lot has happened in the last 2 years. Can you share with us a little bit about the current state of talent acquisition at Wells Fargo, what that looks like?
Yeah, you know, we are on a multi-year path for really trying to transform our function. We're kind of focused in 4 specific areas. We're trying to create some strategic alignment. We've been our company in general had been really decentralized for a really long portion of our time. And so now we're really trying to find strategic alignments across talent acquisition so that we can become more efficient and work as a single body together. We're really focused on process simplification. And I think that's probably something that we're getting a little bit of like head nodding. I think that as we move into this new era of talent acquisition, we really want our recruiters to be focused on that strategic consultation versus, pushing papers or virtual papers, if you will. And so really focused on process simplifications. I think the other thing that we're really focused on as an organization is data-driven decision making. So really focusing on building out our analytics and insights that are available to our leaders, recruiters, so that we can leverage the vast amounts of data out there. And really trying to push that forward to overall become part of our culture within our team. So we're really in a long-term multi-year path for transformation. We spent this year really creating that roadmap, focusing on creating clear accountabilities across the organization. And then again, really investing in our overall data strategy so that we can make sure that we're making data-driven decisions.
One of the things that other talent acquisition leaders I speak with regularly are very focused on right now and have been really since the pandemic is capacity management modeling and the ability to, be really agile, expand and contract in response to what's happening out there in the market. Can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like at Wells Fargo?
Yes, that's something that we've spent a lot of time over the last year or two really refining. With an organization our size, obviously we have peaks and valleys that like a lot of the folks that are on this call today have to adjust to. And so we have some great analytics folks on our team who spent some time really looking at how we can better forecast the capacity that's going to be needed and create a nimble workforce that can work across and take, as we see, we very rarely, except for in 2022, see an up trajectory for everybody. Last year was a very unique year, as all of us remember, where everybody was hiring last year. But generally speaking, you see, some groups go up and some groups go down. And so we now have a capacity management process that brings our recruiting leaders together every month to take a look across the organization on what our current capacity is, and more importantly, what the future capacity looks like in the coming months, so that we can proactively move resources, assess what our needs are, and create action plans to be able to address that. And I think the formalizing of that process, I think we used to do it a lot, on chat, and on the phone. We worked together well, but now we formalize that process so that we can use all of our great minds to solve business problems. And I think that makes such a big difference. So I'm super proud of the capacity planning management team that we created. They happen to be on my team, and I actually think a couple of them joined this call today. So I want to do a shout out to them because I think they're doing great work.
That's great. I just love how simple things like putting structure around getting together and having conversations so that everyone has the bigger 30,000 foot view. So it's really great. So is that those conversations probably part of the revamping of your high volume process? And I know a lot of our members are doing high volume hiring. And there's a lot of pressures related to that for sure.
Yeah, you bet. Lori, one of the things as we step back this year and really looked at what our priorities are, with the type of high volume that we take on at Wells Fargo, we really wanted to take a look at our overall high volume process. I think what's really interesting to me over the last, say, 5 to 10 years, we've really seen that shift in high volume, in the high volume space, right? The gig economy has really changed what candidates are looking for in a high volume process, right? They can wait in line for a job, for us to go through a process for a month or two, or they can sign up with Uber and drive for Uber at, in a couple of days. And we really have to try to relook at how we approach that high volume population. And so what we're trying to do is really step back and say, okay, we've been around a long time. Our process has kind of evolved over time. If we were to do it differently, how would we do it differently? And so trying to automate things to the extent that we can. There's some things on the horizon that we're trying to look at. I think we're also trying to focus on the experience for that high volume candidate. So often high volume candidates don't get the type of feedback that they want in terms of their process to be able to use it meaningfully moving forward. And so trying to address those kinds of things. So that focus on the high volume process for us is really important. And I think the interesting piece from a TA transformation perspective is that when you're a company like ours and you do that kind of volume, our non-high volume spaces benefit from the look that we're doing on all of this, right? Our non-high volume candidates also want a simple process. Our non-high volume candidates also want to know, get feedback, all of that good stuff. So we're trying to almost get a 2-for-1 in that work, right? Let's focus on working on our high volume process and then expanding to see how do we leverage what we're learning from our high volume process across our organization.
So I'm not going to assume, but I'll assume a little bit that Tom may have a question about the technology piece of this, in terms of what ATS are you using, and are you using CRM along with that? Is that part of this whole revamping process?
So our tech stack is something that's evolving for sure. I will say that.
Not alone.
But I think everybody's probably saying, preach. That's exactly what we all do, is try to continue evolving our tech stack. We did move to Workday last year. As those of you who have moved to Workday, that first year is always a stabilization year, and we definitely needed to do that. We actually went from 2 ATSs to 1. And so bringing all of that together last year is always, in your first year, it's that journey of just stabilizing everything. Now, as we proceed, we are looking at our overall tech stack. We also work with Beamery to help to facilitate and use some of their product. I don't think that we're using it yet to the extent that we will be as we continue to look at how we want to interact with our candidates. So excited about the future, but we're still early on, because that, as all of us know, when you make that big shift in changing out your ATS, it really does kind of destabilize everything for a little bit as you start to work yourself back up.
Absolutely. So, Tom, let's take a pause. Are there any questions in the chat that we want to address before we continue on?
There was one question from Andrea just asking which job or pool are you doing for hiring? I may be referring to the high volume hiring. Not real clear on the question, but you might be able to respond.
Sure. So for high volume, we actually have high volume in 2 spaces. We have a very large, what I would say, retail footprint, which is for our branch network. And then we also have a very large call center operation, multi-channeled call center operation.
Very good. So thank you. And Andrea says thanks. I want to encourage folks to use the chat to ask more questions, and I'll curate those for our guest today. And thank you, Lori, for asking about the tech stack. I always like to know what our guests and their organizations are using for whatever areas they're representing. And I'll just note too that here at I4CP, We did a study last year on core HR, HRIS systems. This year, we're doing 2 studies. First on learning and development, that area, the tech stack for the LMS and related tools. That survey actually will be starting in the field next week, so watch for that. And then probably sometime in the September timeframe, we'll be doing one on this topic, talent acquisition, the ATS and CRMs and everything else that can go into that ecosystem for TA. So watch for that survey coming as well.
Yeah. Hey, Tom, this is a totally unplanned plug, but I will say for my TA partners out there, I find myself listening in more to L&D publications and podcasts probably than I ever have before. And I think that that's part of the evolution around talent management. With, like we've moved away from just acquisition. And I think that's going to be more and more the case as we move forward. Our population, I think our candidate population is not as bifurcated as it used to be. You know what I mean? Just internal and external. Now it's internal, returnships, all of these things that are happening. And so I think for that's the one thing that kind of surprised me in my interest as I look for these types of things to listen to and to engage in, is that L&D space is definitely starting to blend over in a more, it's always been a connection. We've always been kind of cousins. But I think it's definitely much more overlap now. And I think it's only going to be more.
Yeah, I completely agree. In the past, there was sort of an obvious point in the process, onboarding, where TA would bring someone on and then there'd be L&D involved with onboarding. But now there's pre-boarding and there's general education materials for candidates. And that's where a strong partnership between TA and L&D can really prove very powerful.
Yeah, you bet.
Sure. And that's a perfect segue, because I wanted to talk about focus on skills first, recruiting, hiring, and also recruiting from non-traditional sources, the role of assessment in all of that.
Yeah, Lori, I think I think it's going back to what I just talked about. I think that we really are in a unique changing space within the talent space at this point. I think that I remember the first couple of times that I saw individuals. I'm going to start with a story and then I'll back up to your topic there, Lori. The first couple of times that I saw somebody leave a company and then return back within like 18 months. And I thought that was I remember it being super novel a couple of years ago when I saw that for the first time, going, wow. That was just not something that was really popular. And now we see that a lot more. And for me, it really started to generate the fact that how we had been looking at hiring, right? How many years of experience in this job do you have? And how many years of experience in that job do you have? Is really dated, because when people start to make those moves for 18 months at a time, they pick up skills in a really unique way that, like the more traditional, like every couple of years getting a new job kind of creates your resume. And so I really think that I've definitely found myself becoming kind of a skills evangelist, if you will, and really trying to help people to see that, the way we've traditionally looked for this traditional candidate will soon place us out of the market if we continue to just look for that stair-stepped candidate. And so what that really does is it puts us back to the conversation around skills. When that person did that job, what skills did they develop, and how will that translate specifically into this job? And so I think that more and more for the recruiters of tomorrow, it will be about helping to translate skills versus looking for that linear resume that seems that used to be able to say that, okay, that person's ready for that job now.
Mhm.
I think that's not really where we are anymore. We have to be looking deeper into, when that person did that job, what are the skills that they developed? Are they ready to do this job, regardless of whether or not they've done it already? We just won't have the number of candidates that have the exact experience that you're looking for anymore. So how do you develop a good framework and work with your L&D partners to make sure that we're properly training folks when they come on to be able to really take on those next generation jobs?
Is this something that you in TA have conversations with your hiring managers about? Has there been some learning on the part of hiring managers in this process?
I think so. I think that we are still early in that discussion, but I think the whole notion of build versus buy is not new. It's something that we've talked about, I think, at a macro level for a long time. Like, so when we're doing real workforce planning, we talk about that. But now I think it is a build versus buy conversation with the recruiters, and it's something that we're really trying to help develop that repertoire, right? Like, for this job, does this job need to be, do we have to go out and get that skill, or can we build that? And what does it look like for this particular role? And I think that that's probably the evolution of where of that whole build versus buy topic. It's gone from that. I think we still talk about it at a macro level. There's no question about that. But those recruiters that can have a real conversation around build versus buy on a one-on-one basis are really those next level recruiters, right? Those are the ones that are really adding value in a really unique way.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Tom, anything in the chat we need to address before we move on? Because we're going to talk a little bit about internal mobility, and I know that we all are really wanting to dig into that conversation.
Yeah, no, let's pivot to that. That's a topic that I've spent a lot of work on myself. Those of you on the call that are I4CP members probably know, and hopefully have downloaded the guidebooks that I've put together, both on what we were just talking about, the sort of skills as the new currency in talent management, how to build a skills database and so on, but then also a guidebook on internal mobility. So yeah, would love to pivot to that next.
So Joanna, internal mobility, everybody's always wanting to talk about it, and some organizations are still in the talking about it stage. So if you could just give us an overview of what it looks like at Wells Fargo, and also, is it an internal platform that you've built? Did you purchase a platform? What is happening there?
Yeah, happy to talk about it. Well, first things first, I will tell you that Wells Fargo has always had a large focus on internal movement. I don't think it's been it's not been a formalized process for years, but we've always seen more than 50% of our hiring, of our actual hires annually, happen internally. And so and I think that that's part of the culture. We've always had a culture of people with long-standing tenure building long-term careers at Wells Fargo, and so we've always seen that. But I think what we've done recently is really started to realize that natural flow is not enough to be able to help us to really achieve the goals that we're looking for. And so we haven't, Tom, to answer your question about a platform or anything like that. We haven't. There are some interesting products out there. There's no two ways about that help to facilitate internal movement. We haven't gotten that route at this time. But instead, what we have done is formalized a process around it. This is in partnership with our talent management team. So it doesn't, the overall program sits with our talent management team, and we in talent acquisition partner to facilitate the process, where we look to try to identify candidates that clearly have the skills for the roles that we're looking for, and make way for that process to be very easy to facilitate the movement, so that we can continue that person's growth. And I think when you think about generational changes, that is something that we will continue to focus on and will continue to see more of, because we, I think that there was a time where people said, okay, I'll keep trying to find my path. And I think now we have a workforce generation that says, I want a path. And if we want to work together company, I want to be able to see that path. And so being able to find opportunities that help people to grow, that help the business do better, is really critical. And so I'm really excited about the fact that we launched that internal mobility program this year. Again, trying to harness the already significant amount of internal movement that we've had, that's been fairly, kind of it comes as it goes. We're trying to be much more directive around it and really try to find the right skills, find the right opportunities for folks, and make it easier to move people into those roles.
Yeah. So there's a question from the chat. I had the same question. So I believe Elizabeth posted this, but is there a time and role requirement before anybody can think about moving to a different role?
We do have minimum requirements that can have exceptions. However, with the internal movement process, it really is about filling, right time, right place, and so we don't really apply any kind of minimum requirements to that, because when a position becomes open, you can't really, and you're trying to find the right skill set. So in general, yes, we do have that, just to try to help people to kind of stay in their roles, gain the experience that they need. But there certainly are ways to move away around that, just simply because all roles don't open at the perfect time for people, right?
Right. So who ultimately owns internal mobility at Wells Fargo?
So the overall concept is owned by our talent management team, but we operate really closely with them, and making sure that we facilitate the process of the candidates, right? That's really our focus. That is another one of our cousins, close cousins in talent management, that really works closely with us. We talk about what we see in the industry and how we want to help to facilitate it. So I really do see it as a really tight partnership with talent acquisition, but the overall strategy sits within our talent management team.
Okay. And let's talk a little bit about metrics with internal talent mobility. Are managers rewarded, incentivized to develop and move talent?
So they're not incentivized to, no. To answer your question really quickly, the answer is no. But we are early on with this, Lori. So maybe you ask me again in a year to see where we evolve to. But right now, what we're really trying to help people to see is how some of these conversations can be formalized in this process, and so we're trying to get people to understand it versus trying to incentivize financially or anything like that. So I think that that's a good thing. We don't want people just moving for the sake of movement, right? We want people to be really thoughtful around it. And it's new for a lot of folks, within managers within Wells Fargo. And so we really want it to be used for the right reasons, instead of just movement for the sake of movement.
Got it. Somebody asked a question about a Workday question. About capturing skills in Workday. And I know this is also another area that Tom is our internal subject matter expert on, and that is, skills inventorying and really understanding who you have, what you need, and what you're going to need a couple of years down the road. Do you want to add anything to that, Tom?
No, yeah, no, that's basically the question. Since you've moved to Workday, is that where you're keeping skills profile information, or plan to in the near future, their skills cloud product?
So we are just this side of a minimum viable product as we went live last year. We've made some improvements, we're in 18 months from our go live. So we are not fully I don't think we're fully mature in the product yet. So I don't think we're a good use case on that. There are others that have been with the product a lot longer. But we continue that. But what I will say is that as we think about our transformation, we are trying to figure out how to leverage the existing resources that we have. We have products like Workday and Beamery, who both have, different products for us to be able to leverage, and so we're trying to figure out our best path so that it becomes the best experience for both our external candidates, but also our internal candidates.
One other question that was asked by, I think it was Christine, and then got some thumbs up. So apparently there's several people wondering about this. When it comes to internal movement, how do you consider equity, mitigating bias, diversity goals, things like that? How do those interplay with movement?
Yeah, we certainly do that. Thanks for that question. It is something that we do pay attention to, and it's why we have a specialized group that manages the process so that we can look through all of that as we go through the process. So it is not just a simple transaction. We take a look. We have a very robust process, as many of us do, related to making sure that we have equity in our processes, and we apply that as we go through the internal mobility process. We have a centralized group that is doing that for us to make sure that we take a look at all of those steps as we make those decisions. So it is the difficult, not the difficult. It is part of that process. Like, it can't be ignored. But we also want people to. So it's finding that balance, right, to make sure that we're taking a look at those things. But also making sure that we focus on the movement for our internal candidates. So I think that it's something that we've built into our overall process, and also why I think we haven't found the perfect system to be able to take over, because we want to make sure that we're following our processes.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so boy, time is flying. So I think this is probably going to be a topic of conversation for every Next Practices weekly discussion going forward. And that is what's happening in your organization around AI, in particular, generative AI. So are you using it? If you're using it, how's that going? Or are you considering using it? What is happening with your team?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say that we are early adopters necessarily, because I know that there's a lot of other companies that are jumping in with both feet, but we are definitely playing in the space. I think the place that we started in that is probably the safest is, as I talked about our focus on data and analytics, we're building a large suite of analytics that are available, that make available data in dashboards. In order to do that, when you're a large company like us, we have, like I said, we have Beamery, we have Workday, we have all these groups, and we have to be able to bring that data together and synthesize it. So we use a lot of RPA and AI to be able to bring those flat files together and merge them together so that we can use the data across the different platforms that we use. So that's the safest and the easiest way for us to plug in and really get started, right? And what I have been really excited about to see as we did that earlier in the year is it has really significantly, we don't have a large team of people that are turning out our data and analytics, and yet our usage is going through the roof. And it's largely because we're able to take files from all over our different systems that we're operating in and put them together and utilize AI to be able to push all of that together so that we can use it. That has made a really big difference in the type of data that we can look at. We can look at what's happening in this system and this system, versus before we used to have to look at them separately and kind of try to figure out how does that how does that work together, right? So I think that that's how we're currently utilizing it to the extent that we can. The generative AI, I will tell you that is something that we're, my strategy team is paying special attention to. I think there's a lot of opportunity in that. We're looking at figuring out the best way to pull out repetitive work for our recruiters so that our recruiters can focus on strategic consulting and not looking at 300 resumes at one time. We have not zeroed in on exactly how we're going to resolve those things, but those are the problem statements that we're looking at to try to figure out how to resolve. I think the other thing that we're looking at is when you look at the number of roles that we have at Wells Fargo, and how specialized so many of those roles are. We opened the call talking about capacity management and making it easier for us to move recruiters from group to group. The thing that holds us back from doing that at times is not having some of that experience or knowledge about what's going on in this line of business, or what's the focus items in this business. And so one of the things that we're looking at is figuring out how to give like a recruiting assistant to our recruiters, right? To figure out, okay, this particular organization is in growth mode related to this particular product. And if our recruiters can learn that through the knowledge that their peers are getting, right? And we can start to share that information, that will make our workforce a lot more nimble to be able to meet the needs of the business. And so that's one area, Tom, that we're spending a good amount of time looking at to figure out how we can create that recruiting assistant that can help our recruiters across the board. The other thing that I think is really out there for companies is utilizing it to bring to life policies and procedures. That's something that takes a lot of time on the part of a recruiter to go find out what is the policy on how we move people at this way, or what, when we're trying to move somebody from here to here, what's that policy? And they spend 2 hours trying to figure out how to do that, right? Can we put things like policies and procedures in a place that can be easily like the problem statement can be worded in normal language. You don't have to have any kind of advanced degree to be able to do it. How do I find this particular policy and find that? So we're working on those kinds of things to be able to really give those tools to our recruiters in a new and unique and faster way.
So that brings me to tying this to a lot of the things that we've talked about earlier. Working with the TA leaders on the TA board, I've really come to learn very clearly the last couple of years that the talent acquisition function, that role, just took a big hit in terms of stress and burnout, especially during the pandemic. And a lot of organizations are very much still in the rebuilding of their TA function process. Can you share a little bit about how you care for recruiters, how you care for your team through a boom and bust cycle, and what that looks like in terms of well-being, mentoring?
Yeah. What I would say is that the recruiting position is a really unique one I think in the HR space. It is impacted by boom and bust much more than like an HR generalist, for example. You know what I mean? And so what I've started to realize is how important mentorships are. And what I really love is that so many organizations now within the talent acquisition space are offering cross-company mentorships. And I think that that's so critical for our recruiters now, and more importantly for our recruiters to engage in those, so that more people can hear from leaders across the industry. Because very rarely do you see a recruiter who just stays in one company for many years. You see them moving around, so that getting that cross company exposure from a mentorship perspective is really important. So I always like to talk about the fact that I think that creating mentorships is really critical, and engaging in programs where you can. But doing that outside of your company, I think is probably a uniquely talent acquisition opportunity, and more organizations are offering that for us to get involved with our industry and not just within our company. And I think that's really critical, Lori. I hope others are doing that too.
So do I. All right, so this is the prognostication portion of the program. What do you see in terms of the future of talent acquisition? What are the key challenges that TA leaders are facing, and what trends do you see having big impact, not just in the next year or two, but maybe 5 years out, 10 years out?
Yeah. So I think this is a really exciting time in talent acquisition, because I think when you think about what corporations in general are the talent landscape for corporations in general is different in the future than it is today, and you can see it starting to materialize. I talked a little bit about it earlier, but I think having a real real handle on consulting in that build versus buy, I think is really something that has to be in a talent acquisition leader and a recruiter's toolkit. Really understanding what are options on how to, like, instead of seeing it as, okay, a requisition has come in, it's time for me to get started, or we're gonna build out this call center, let's go hire all these folks. It's really starting to ask questions about what's the future of this role? How long do you expect that this project is going to go? I mean, if you think about it, Agile has really changed what projects look like now in corporate America, right? We're talking about sprints instead of 3-year projects, right? So what does that do in terms of what the real need is? I think these are those conversations that are really going to, be the difference maker for talent acquisition, so that we're able to consult to that in a really unique and different way. I think the other thing that's interesting right now is, like every other function, it's really important for us right now to be thinking about how we're evolving our function. This is an interesting year coming off of last year. Like, we've never seen in 18 months, at least I haven't in my more than 20 years of talent acquisition. We've never seen 18 months, or now going on 2 years, like we've seen this in the last two. But I do think that that volatility is probably more of a norm than it has ever been in the past. And so I think in these periods where we have to take these periods right now and really think about retooling our functions, retooling our recruiters. How much education are we focusing on for our recruiters right now? This is that time to be doing that. That's why I hope there are recruiters on the call today, because I know a year ago it would have been impossible to get a recruiter to get an hour to be able to sit on a call like this. But my hope is that there's folks on the call today because they're in the process of their retooling. And so I think that's another piece that I see really, really far out in the future. And then I think the other thing that's really critical is, for talent acquisition leaders, I think that, in the past, it's been enough to have a 1 to 2 year strategic plan. And I think that that was when the tech stacks were less complex. And now, in order to really have a strategic plan, I think it has to be much longer in length. So that you can make all of the changes that need to happen, immediately, like 1 to 2 years tactically, and then 2 to 4 years, you can be more strategic. But if you're really going to make significant shifts in the business, it takes a longer path. And so I think that as leaders, if we're not thinking more, 5+ years out in what we're trying to accomplish, I think that that's going to make it very difficult for you to be on the leading edge of work. It's just you can't react as quickly anymore because things are happening so fast.
Right. So adding to that a little bit in terms of retooling, regrouping, rebuilding, when you're adding to your own team, Joanna, what are you looking for in a talent acquisition professional? What makes a candidate to perhaps join your team really stand out to you?
Yeah. Well, I had the pleasure of adding several folks to my team in the last year. So I got to do a lot of soul searching on that, Lori. And what I will tell you is that the folks that I look for, I'm looking for folks that have that interest in making transformational change. When they're talking about what they think, like, during interview processes or just conversations with candidates, when you hear somebody thinking about something that's outside of what their day job is, that's a good thing. I had the pleasure of talking to somebody who's on my team now, and having a lot of really great conversations as we led up through the process. And to hear some of the things that he was thinking about and working on had nothing to do with his day job really helped me to see that he saw things bigger than just his own job. And I think that is probably the biggest item that I look for in potential folks to join my team, is really looking for people who are thinking away from their desk and away from their computer. How can I see this differently? Because I just don't think that our world is static anymore and can maintain, you just doing a great job at your own job. You have to see what others are doing. You have to see what the market brings. You have to see what other tools are out there, not because we're going to buy all of them, but we want to know what's out there to see what we should be challenging our own businesses to do. And so I think that that's probably the biggest thing, Lori.
I love that. If I can jump in on that, I think that inclination or that aptitude to think and to think more broadly than the tasks or what makes up your core job description. It aligns nicely with a couple of other things you were speaking to, Joanna. One, the more consultative nature of recruiting going forward, and also if AI is going to come in and take away some of the repetitive tasks and allow more room for strategic thinking, well, then you need people in the role that are capable of more strategic thinking and broader thinking. So I think looking for that coming in the door, even if in the short term that there's still a lot of repetitive tasks and such work to be done, you'll be well suited with those individuals down the road.
Exactly. And they can help you build that change, right? If they can imagine something different than what they're doing today, they'll help you make that change. And that's what I think it's important, even though, like, we're not there yet. We're on the journey there, right? But it's still important.
We had one question also from the chat. I'm looking at the time. We've only got a few minutes left, but one question around, you mentioned mentorship is something that you're a big advocate of in the TA space for recruiters and other roles. What about just more broadly, how you go about training folks as they join your team, or folks enroll, maybe who have been there for a while? The question specifically mentioned one tactic in L&D, gamification, but I'd be curious not only about if you've used any of that, but just different training modalities that you've pursued. Obviously, a lot of companies shifted to online training early in the pandemic and have, at least to some degree, stuck with that. But I'm wondering just how you go about doing training for your folks, whether you yourself or other leaders are involved. We have found at I4CP that involving leaders in training programs in any way that you can, usually paired with a skill facilitator, can be a big boost. So how do you go about upskilling your folks?
Yeah, I think all of those things. I think also there's also a lot of on-demand options. That's the one thing that I think has changed for us. I think the other thing that when I talk about training with my team is not only the position-specific training, which we have, but more importantly, offering a lot of small 15-minute on-demand training episodes that talk about other aspects of the business. If it's 15 to 20, even maybe close to 30, but that's getting long. If it's 15 to 20 minutes, then somebody can pop in and learn more about this function or that function, or even something small like, Excel, or something like that. I think that's something that is more palatable and easier to work into a recruiter's busy schedule than trying to take a day to go and do XYZ. You know what I mean? So I think that for me, the thing that I'm probably most excited about the focus on at Wells Fargo right now is really trying to put out more of that on-demand training, short snippets that really help to build skill, and more importantly, focusing on skills, not just recruiting skills. I think that that's important, and we certainly should onboard our recruiters and give them knowledge and coach them through the processes and all of those things. But I think it's more about, when we think about that strategic consultant, it's more about them having a better understanding of the business, having a better understanding of what's going on in each of the lines of businesses, so that they can see a broader perspective when they're having things like build buy conversations and things like that. I think those are the real key things, and utilizing products that allow for those snippet. Cornerstone is the one we use, but there are a lot of other ones out there that give you that opportunity to give short snippets. I think is a great opportunity for us to help our recruiters grow.
Well, very good. Thank you for that. So in looking at the time, I think we need to wrap here. Lori, thank you for leading this conversation. Wonderful job.
Great. We could do it for another hour. There's so many other questions I have for Joanna, so you'll have to come back.
Absolutely. Now that I realize I'm a returning champion, I'm happy to do it again.
That's right. Yeah. Thank you, Joanna, for everything you shared. I know folks, based on all the questions you were getting in the chat and thanks that are coming in now, much appreciated. Two quick announcements before we wrap. I just put a link in the chat to our latest Pulse survey. We do major studies like some of the ones I've mentioned throughout this call on AI, and we'll have one coming up on L&D technology. We've got one now in the field on just how flexible is your hybrid work policy. We'd love folks on the call today. Click that link, do that. It's a short survey, in this case, a Pulse survey, only 5 minutes long. Would love for you to participate and get your input there. These sessions are now available for HRCI and SHRM credits. So if you are someone who has a certification with either of those organizations and attended this call, jot down the relevant program ID or activity ID, and that can go towards your recertification needs. Thank you, Kiara, for also putting that in the chat for folks. And then lastly, just want to note, we have an annual conference at I4CP for HR leaders. We don't have a trade show, so there's no vendors at this event. It's just for HR professionals, HR leaders. We have great speakers that we'll be announcing here very shortly. The next conference will be next March, as we hold it each year in Scottsdale, Arizona. So to learn more about that outstanding HR conference, just go to i4cp.com/conference. And until next time, thank you again, Lori. Thank you, Joanna. It was a great conversation.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your week.
Bye-bye.